I'm visiting with Bill Anderson, Whispering Bill in some circles. Bill, in doing some of my research on your visit to this program, I found that not only is Whispering Bill a nickname, but I found a few more. Gunboat?
Where did you get that from?
Is that true?
Yeah, that's something that the kids in my neighborhood used to call me when I was a young teenager because I wore the biggest shoes of anybody on our ball team. Everybody else wore like size 7 or 8, and at that time I wore like about a size 10, and somebody said, "Your shoes look like gunboats."
And so the kids picked
So
up.
they started calling me Gunboat.
Okay. High pockets.
That's another one, because I was the tallest kid in the neighborhood. I mean, I'm about 6'2" now, and I was a good 6 feet tall by the time I was 15 years old. And I guess in those days, maybe I wore my pants up a little higher than the low-slung Levi's, which was really kind of the rage of the day. And yeah, they started calling me High Pockets. Have you been talking to my mother?
No,
Where did you get this
I don't
from?
know. This is old research I did years ago. And the final one was hillbilly.
Well, now that's what the other players called me when I played high school baseball. I was a left-handed pitcher on our high school team and was having a pretty good bit of success my junior and senior year. And they used to try to get me rattled. The other team would stand over by their dugout and they would hold their baseball bats like they were guitars, and they'd go, "Aha, come on, hillbilly, throw the ball."
Did the opposing teams all know that you played the guitar and sang?
Yeah, because I was on television a lot around Atlanta. I was on radio from the time I was in about the 10th grade on. And so it was pretty well known. And they just picked up on the name hillbilly because that's what they called people with guitars back in those days.
Well, not only that, the opposing team is not going to be nice to you.
No,
Were you
I
pretty good?
tried not to be nice to them either. Ralph, I couldn't throw hard enough to break a window pane. In fact, they used to tease me and tell me that they made extra money on the nights I pitched. They sold advertising on the side of the ball. But I had real good control, and I had a real good roundhouse curve ball and a drop ball, and I could throw it just about anywhere I wanted it to go. And by being able to do that, I was pretty successful with it for a couple of years. I went to college to play baseball. That was my intention, because out of high school, I had a couple of offers to go to the training camps of some of the major league teams, the instructional league type thing. And I really wanted to pursue baseball because that was really my first love. But I had told my parents years ago that one thing I was going to do was go to college. It was the only thing I guess I ever promised them I was going to do with my life. And so I went to the University of Georgia intending to play baseball. Got over there, met some guys who were going to school on the GI Bill, a little older than me, who wanted to form a country band. I got in the band with them and never picked up a baseball again. One of my teammates from high school had a scholarship there. He had graduated a year or two before me, and he was very successful, doing very well at Georgia. And he was going to recommend me to the coach. In fact, he had recommended me to the coach, and they were going to give me a pretty close look. I think I could have made the team. I had a lot of determination.
Well, you just told me your pitch was a little slow, Bill. Were you going to make it on control?
I think what they could have done, Ralph, once I got over there, I think if I could have really worked with a pitching coach that really could have shown me how to really put my body behind the ball. I threw with my arm. I never learned how to throw with my body until much later in life when I began working at it some. And I think had they really shown me how to do that, I could have thrown hard enough to get by. And I think with the control I had in the other pitches, I think I could have made it.
Bill has a new album called Country Music Heaven, and Bill is attempting to prove that once again a country music recitation can be very popular. You know, Red Foley and Tex Ritter used to do these things, and Jimmy Davis. They had a part of their career was made of doing recitations.
Well, when you go all the way back to Hank Williams, the Drifter records that he made, I think Red Sovine did a recitation about as well as anybody. Porter Wagner's good at them. I don't think recitations or narrations ever really fell out of favor with the public. I think country music radio in its new formats with more of an emphasis on up-tempo music and so forth just basically gradually began to get away from playing recitations. The old song that Eddie Dean put out first back in the 1950s, and then, of course, it was so closely associated for many years with the great Tex Ritter. We recorded it first, Ralph, as Hillbilly Heaven, and then decided that maybe the word hillbilly was a little passé, and maybe country music heaven fit today's marketplace a little bit better.
Tell them about some of the other songs in the album.
Well, we went through a long list of songs to get it down to the 10 or 12 pieces of material that we did. I did some of my own favorites. I'll have to be honest with you. I chose some of them just because I happen to like them an awful lot, like Drinking from My Saucer, because my cup is overflowed. I think that's got such a positive message to it. In fact, I wanted all of these songs to have a positive message where somebody could listen to them and kind of hold on to something for the day. I had a lady write me when she first got this album and said that she plays one cut out of this album every morning and then kind of tries to keep that with her throughout the day. And I thought, what a nice compliment and what an unusual thing for somebody to say.
Well, there are certain songs here I readily identify with. Touch of the Master's Hand, I recorded once for Liberty Records. Drinking from My Saucer is a favorite of Jimmy Dean's. Jimmy loves to do that on stage.
Great piece of material.
And I think the last time he came to Nashville now, somebody asked him if he would do that. One Solitary Life. That's a great
A lot of
piece.
people think that One Solitary Life is a Christmas song because it has been recorded several times as a Christmas song, but it really fits any time of the year, and we took a different type of an approach to it and recorded it with just an old hymn in the background rather than a Christmas song, but it's a very, very powerful piece of material.
It is. It's the story of Christ, and I think it's probably the best story about him I've ever heard.
Well, it totally capsulizes, I guess, his life, and in the fact that materially he had nothing, and yet today he's the most influential person that's ever lived.
And everywhere he went, he walked.
Yeah.
Bill, there are two in here that I used to do. Touch of the Master's Hand, I recorded for Liberty Records, and there was one I stole from Archie Campbell that Archie had done, and I used to do it on stage. Not having a great singing act, I used to do Trouble in the Amen Corner.
That's a great piece of material.
And Old Brother Eyre.
It really paints a picture. It really does. You can just see this old man. I mean, there's one in every church. There's one guy or one lady in every church choir that, as the song says, the choir is great trouble, they called him, because he insisted on singing, and he sang off tune, and his voice was cracking, and he'd get behind and miss the words, and so the committee went to him and told him he had to quit singing, and it's quite a powerful story.
What is he says something about when he gets to heaven, he wonders if they'll throw him out up there.
When I try to sing my songs up higher, will they kick me out up there for singing in heaven's choir?
Well, you know, one time, Bill, as you know, I don't write songs, but I became so enamored with that song that I tried to write a song called Brother Eyre in Heaven and take this a step further. And what I did, I made him the hero. When all these other people in the church died, they got there, and he was the leader of the church choir.
Well, take that.
And he was picking out who would sing.
That's justice.
Another Jimmy Dean favorite, Farmer and the Lord.
I have loved that song for as long as I have known that song, and it goes back into, I think, probably the late 1950s, maybe the early 50s. A fellow named Jim Wilson recorded that, I think, the first time, and he wrote the song. I love the simplicity in that song. I love the fact that the guy's talking to the Lord just like he'd be talking to a friend, telling him all of his problems and then saying, Lord, you think I wasn't grateful.
You know, I just noticed that you did a song in here that Glenn Campbell recorded and wrote, and it was in an early album by Glenn several years ago called Friends. And Glenn did not do many recitations. I think this is the only one I can recall he ever did.
I think it's the only one that I remember his ever doing. I like this song a lot because, you know, what would life be without our friends? And the fact that we need to nourish our friendships and take care of them, or as the song says, they'll drift away like smoke. I like that song an awful lot.
Old Doc Brown, I remember Red Foley doing Old Doc Brown.
I remember the Hank Snow record of Old Doc Brown. It's a very, very strong song about the doctor who didn't have very much and marked all of his accounts paid in full and had to move up over an old livery stable for the last days of his practice.
Bill, I want to ask you about what you remember about Roy Acuff. Roy Acuff passed away in late November of 1992, And on this program, a number of people have told me about their relationship. Vince Gill, Lori Morgan, Ricky Skaggs. And I know you made a record with him.
I got to know Mr. Roy perhaps from a little different angle than anybody else, because we became, in effect, almost duet partners with this song called I Wonder If God Likes Country Music. And I really never felt like I really knew Mr. Roy until we did this. I mean, of course, I knew him. I mean, we'd speak and certainly perform together at the Opry and various things, but I never felt like I really had the deep insight into Roy Acuff, the man, until we did this record. And I learned some things about him. For example, after we recorded the song the first time and began to sing it some at the Opry and various places, I would go to Roy. He would never come to me and say, let's perform it. I would always go to him, and I would always ask him at the Opry or various places, you feel like doing our song, the duet? And every time we did it, he would want to rehearse it before we went on the stage. I don't know if he was a little unsure of himself, a little unsure of maybe performing with my band, maybe performing with me. But I thought this gave an insight into the man and how much he really cared, and what a perfectionist he was in his own way, that if he was going to go out on the stage and do this, he wanted to do it well and he wanted to do it right.
Did he ever tell you any stories about the old days when he was a giant in country music?
Oh, yeah, we talked about that. We talked about his trips to California to make movies, and he told me how bored he was sitting around on a movie set, how he was geared, as all live entertainers are, to go out on the stage and perform, and your time comes, you do your thing, and then you go home. And this sitting around on the movie set bothered him. I got some insight into him when we filmed the video on I Wonder If God Likes Country Music, because as you know, in later years, Roy's eyesight was not real good. He couldn't see well. But the day we filmed the video, there was a young girl in my band, a very attractive young brunette lady named Marcia Wells, and because the song mentions my band, I had my band there with me. And I want to tell you something, Roy Acuff never took his eyes off of Marcia Wells the whole time we were filming that video, and I said to him, I said, Mr. Roy, I thought you had trouble seeing. He said, I can always see a pretty girl.
Bill, how old was he when you recorded that song?
The first time we recorded it was in the late 1970s. So let's see, he would have been, in his 70s, I guess.
79.
At that point. And then we recorded it again when we did the video. We cut the song completely from scratch again, and that would have been about 1987 or so. So he would have been up in his 80s by this time.
He loved the Grand Ole Opry.
There was nothing in the world like walking on that stage with that man, either having him introduce me and bring me out, or having him walk out and sing his part on I Wonder If God Likes Country Music. I remember one of the last times we did it, and his eyesight was failing him, and he had done such a magnificent performance. And at the end of the song, the audience all just leaped to their feet, standing ovation. And he turned to me and he said, they ain't going home, are they?
I like that. Bill, it seems to me that you've had a few firsts in country music. Weren't you the first country guest to be on the Mike Douglas show?
Yes, I was, and I'll never forget walking into the studio. They were doing the show at that time out of Cleveland. He eventually moved to Philadelphia, and that's where it was during its heyday. But Mike was doing his show in Cleveland in those days, and I walked in with my two-man band. I had Weldon Myrick playing steel guitar and Jimmy Lance playing guitar. We walked into the TV studio in Cleveland, and there was a little jazz combo that played on the show every day, and one of the musicians saw us coming in and setting up our country instruments, and he turned to another musician in the band. He said, well, this will set our show back 10 years.
Oh, he did?
Well, that's the way they used to look at country people.
Oh, I know.
They used to look down their noses at us.
And being the first, I guess you had to take some heat.
You took some flack, but we just went right on the show. I remember Don Amici was on that day, and Miss America was Mary Ann Mobley, so that'll date it as to about when it was. And everybody was very nice. The studio audience loved it, and we just had to kind of put that out of our heads and say, look, we came to entertain the people, not the jazz band.
And then subsequently, Mike Douglas would come to Nashville, and he was constantly looking for country entertainers to be on his program. So that coin turned over very quickly. And now, today, country entertainers are very much in demand on everything.
Absolutely. They tell me every time they put country music on a network television show, the ratings go up.
So Mike Douglas had a pretty good idea. Were you booked there because of your success as a songwriter, because you were on the Grand Ole Opry? Of all the country singers, why did they pick you?
I really don't know, Ralph. I can't answer that, although that was about the time that my record of Still was a crossover record into the pop charts as well as the country charts, and it may have just been a case of the timing being right.
On my list over here, I have you down with 54 BMI awards for songwriting. Has that been extended?
Well, I hope it will be in the fall of this year, because I've been told that the Steve Wariner version of Tips of My Fingers is going to earn another BMI award for that song come fall. So I haven't been writing a lot of new songs, but I have been doing a lot of my old songs and bringing them up to date, like the Tips of My Fingers. There's a new record coming out on an old song of mine that you might remember called Walk Out Backwards, and I'll Think You're Walking In.
Yeah,
remember that
who's
one?
doing that?
A new artist on CBS has just recorded that. So I'm taking a lot of my old songs and reworking them and trying to bring them up to today's type material.
How extensive is your catalog, Bill?
Many hundreds of songs.
Well, let's just say the ones that have been recorded, either by you or somebody else. Let's just say, how many recordings have you had of Bill Anderson material? Any idea?
I don't have any idea, Ralph. It would be way up in the hundreds, because there are many songs in the catalog, like Tips of My Fingers, like City Lights, like I Love You Drops and Still, and Think I'll Go Somewhere and Cry Myself to Sleep. Songs like that have been recorded, 20, 30, 40 times each. So if you add all that together, it would be way on up there.
Could you live on songwriting royalties alone?
Well, there was a time when I could have. I haven't had that many hits in recent years. I'd probably have to get out and pick and sing a little bit every once in a while.
You knew Patsy Cline very well, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Patsy and I were both booked for a long time by the late Hubert Long, and we worked a lot of dates together, going back to the very beginning when she was the opening act and I was the headline attraction when we worked together, and then, of course, going up to the days when she had her big hit records, and I was just glad to be the opening act for her.
Tell me what you remember about Patsy Cline.
Oh, I remember so many things. I think the overriding thing about Patsy, and so many people say this when they talk about her, is the fact that Patsy was just always one of the guys, one of the boys. She was just a good-natured, good-hearted person, a lot of fun to be around. I think the one trip I remember the most with Patsy was a trip we took one time before anything good had ever happened much for either one of us, and we were booked over in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And part of my deal on the show was that I had to furnish the transportation for the other acts on the show. And we left Nashville in my 1958 Ford with no air conditioning on it. Darrell McCall was driving the car. Riding shotgun was Cowboy Copas. And in the back seat was Patsy Cline, String Bean, and Bill Anderson. And I remember the stories that we told.
That's a lot of folks.
Let me tell you, that was a lot of talent in one car riding over those mountains. We told stories from the time we left the city limits of Nashville until the time we got to Hendersonville, North Carolina at daylight. And I remember times that Patsy Cline literally, physically fell off the seat of the car and into the floorboard. And String Bean and I would have to reach over there and pull her up and sit her back in the seat. She was laughing so hard. Mostly it's stories that Cowboy Copas was telling.
Patsy, a storyteller?
Yeah, but I think more than tell the stories, I think Patsy liked to listen to them and laugh at other people's stories.
Bill, I remember one night I ran into Patsy at, I think, a taping of an Army recruiting show where Farron was starring, and of course Hubert was there, and she was really down in the dumps, and this was right before I Fall to Pieces, and she was very much down in the dumps because her career, she didn't feel, was going anywhere. Do you remember those days?
I remember those days because what had happened with her was she'd had the big hit on Walking After Midnight and had gotten a taste of success, and then nothing good happened for her there for 2 or 3 years, 4 years or so before I Fall to Pieces came along. And those were the days when she and I were working together on the road, and she was the opening act and I was closing the show. There's a little amusement park in Chattanooga, right outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, called Lake Winnepesaukah. Mm-hmm. And Patsy and I used to work down there together 3 or 4 Sunday afternoons a year during that time. And she was down about about her career. I don't think she ever really got to the point where she ever considered quitting or anything, because Patsy was a fighter, but there were times when she was pretty discouraged.
Bill, one of the long suits in your career is your writing ability, your creative ability to write country songs that people like. What have been the biggest copyrights for you?
Well, I think probably, Ralph, worldwide, the tips of my fingers, or the tip of my fingers.
Yeah,
and,
I've never known which.
You and I don't need to get into that discussion. We've had it many, many times. That is probably my best-known copyright, particularly now after the Steve Wariner record last year where he took it to #1. But that song's been recorded so many times. It's been a big hit song 5 times.
By?
Well, I had the original record of it in 1960. Roy Clark had a big hit on it in 1963, Eddie Arnold in 1966, Gene Shepard about 1975, and then the Steve Wariner record in 1992.
Okay. What else?
Well, Still is one of the best-known copyrights, but you'd be surprised, Still has not been recorded all that many times, and I think probably because of the narration in the song, although there is an all-singing version of Still. In fact, the way that it was released and became a hit in England, it was sung all the way through as opposed to the narration being done in it. But not many people in the United States have ever done it that way. One of my most prized possessions, records of any song I've ever had, is a Bing Crosby record of Still, where he sang it all the way through.
No kidding.
Yeah.
How about City Lights?
Well, City Lights has been a #1 record twice, the original by Ray Price in the late 1950s and then by Mickey Gilley in the 1970s. And City Lights has been recorded quite a few times.
All right. Trying to think of something else that you would consider among, say, your top 5.
Well, probably some of the Connie Smith things, like Once a Day, which has been recorded many, many times.
Well, I can't hear anybody but her singing that, though. Although it's a good song.
A lot of people have done it. Oh, let me think. Some songs that may not be as big with the public as you might think have been recorded many times. For example, a song that Conway Twitty did called I May Never Get to Heaven was recorded many times prior to Conway doing it. Don Gibson had the original record of it. There's even been a record of it by Aretha Franklin.
Did you write for Porter Wagoner, I've enjoyed as much of this as I can stand?
Yeah, I did. Wrote 3 #1 records for Porter. That one, I'll Go Down Swingin', and The Cold Hard Facts of Life.
You didn't write the Carroll County accident?
No,
then?
Bob Ferguson wrote
Okay,
that one.
all right.
Song Roger Miller and I wrote together called When Two Worlds Collide has been a big copyright too. It's been recorded many, many times.
Does songwriting give you your biggest kick, or does the applause on stage give you your biggest kick?
I kind of have worked out a little story in my mind, Ralph. You go to Pittsburgh and you go on the stage and you play to 10,000 people and they give you a standing ovation on Friday night, and that's the greatest high in the world. But you've got to go to Philadelphia the next night and prove it all over again. It's something that you've got to constantly do everywhere you go to get that kick and to get that high. A hit song may not give you all the great emotional peaks that you get from performing on the stage, but it's such a steady thing. If it's a hit in Pittsburgh, it's a hit in Philadelphia, it's a hit in San Antonio, it's a hit in Los Angeles. So it's really 2 different kinds of thing. I like them both.
Bill, is there a lot of money to be made for a guy who just writes songs?
There is today, Ralph, in the country music business, because of so many radio stations now playing country music. Albums going gold, platinum, double platinum, this kind of thing. When I first came to town, and Roger Miller and Mel Tillis and Wayne Walker and Harlan Howard and Hank Cochran and Willie Nelson and I were writing so many of the songs that came out of the Music City, there wasn't nearly the financial reward to it that there is today.
In checking an old show we did one time, you told me that Willie Nelson offered you Funny How the Time Slips Away, one of his major copyrights, to record first.
He came up to Tree Music one day with his old archtop guitar, and he sat there and he sang the song As Only Willie Can. And at that time, Farron Young had just recorded Willie's song Hello Walls. And it was such an unusual song. Willie was such an unusual writer. He was so far ahead of his time that a lot of us didn't understand him. And all I could picture in my mind was Farron Young saying, "Hello, Walls." And then the first line of Funny How Time Slips Away was, "Well, hello there." And I thought, well, this is the same song. It's 2 similar. And I was not perceptive enough to realize the true genius in Willie Nelson at that point in time, and I turned the song down.
Did you ever write with Willie?
Never did. You know, back in those days, and this is something, I'd give anything if it had been different, because back in those days, if a writer wrote for one company and another writer wrote for another publishing company, you couldn't co-write together because there was no such thing as split copyrights. If one writer was a BMI writer and the other was an ASCAP writer, they couldn't write together because of the performance societies. And now all of those barriers are down and people write together all the time. I would give anything if I could have written with Willie Nelson or written with Hank Cochran.
Well, you did write with Roger Miller.
I did write with Roger.
Because you both wrote for the same publisher.
Publishing company at the time. And there's one song that Roger Miller, Harlan Howard, and Bill Anderson wrote together. And we have found, after all these years, it disappeared for a long time. There was a demo made on it. It was never recorded. The demo has been unearthed in the vaults up at Tree Music, and Harlan and I are going to write one extra verse to it. It needs one more verse, and we're going to try to get that song recorded because it's the only song that the three of us ever wrote together.
Is it a good song?
Yeah, it's a pretty good song. Sure is. It's called Every Road Leads Back to You.
Well, I like the title. How did you find, and I guess that's probably 30 years old, how'd you find that?
There is a new young man named Dale Dotson who is working the old catalog at Tree. He's going back into the vaults and going through all of these old obscure tapes that have been up there for years. He has found not only that, he's found some other gems. He's found some songs up there that I wrote that I absolutely don't even remember. They're so obscure songs that I maybe wrote a verse and a chorus of and would put down on a tape with just me and a guitar. And he has come to me and said, "Oh, what about this one?" I said, "I never wrote a song called that." And he said, "Oh, yes, you did." And he played it for me. So all these treasures are up there. It's just been a case of somebody getting into the vaults and unearthing them.
Well, I hope you get some of them recorded.
Thank you. I hope so, too.
Bill, you still tour? How many days a year?
Oh, not all that many, Ralph. Probably 75, 80 days a year, which is way down from the 200 or 225 or so that I did back at one point in my career. I still enjoy the road. I've got a real good band right now. I like being able to work just about that much. It's enough to where it doesn't wear me out, but it fills whatever that little hole is inside of an entertainer that needs to be filled up every once in a while.
Bill, we lost Roger Miller a few months ago. I know he was a dear friend of yours and dear friend of so many people in this town who all admired his talent. You and Roger were very close, weren't you?
Yeah, we really were, Ralph. I probably, outside of Sheb Woolley, who was once Roger's brother-in-law, I probably knew Roger for a longer period of time than anybody in this business because we met in the mid-1950s when he was stationed at Fort McPherson in Atlanta in the Army, and I was a disc jockey on a radio station about 60 miles away. And we used to go to the old Tower Theater on Peachtree Street in Atlanta every time they'd bring a big Grand Ole Opry show to town. And we met each other backstage and became fast friends, learned that we each had an interest in writing songs and maybe someday being country music performers ourselves. And Roger helped me a lot when he first came to Nashville, and I don't guess I ever had a better friend in the world.
Bill, I want you to retell a story I've had you tell on television, and the reason I'm doing this is because I'm putting this story in my book, my new book, which comes out this fall. And that's the time you almost killed Roger Miller.
He was almost the late and great before he really had a chance to be very great. I was living in a little cabin behind a large house over in South Nashville, and had come home one night from wherever I had been and gone to bed at a fairly early hour. I don't know if I was just tired or whatever. The lights were out in my little cabin, and Roger, as you know, was pretty nocturnal. Roger went to sleep when the sun came up, if at all. And he was out roaming around on this particular night, and I guess he needed a place to land, and he went to my cabin and saw that there were no lights on, and I guess he assumed there was nobody home. The head of my bed was right up against a wall that had several windows right there at the head of the bed. And I was in the bed sound asleep when I was awakened by the sound of one of those windows slowly going up. And I knew somebody was breaking in my cabin. I just figured, well, somebody's coming in here. They're after me. They're after something. Lord knows I didn't have any money or anything back then, but I figured somebody's coming in the window. So I watched. I could see the hand on the bottom of the window as it slowly raised. And then I began to see this body as it came through. Well, the only thing that I could reach with my hand without really making a commotion, and I was afraid it might really frighten somebody and cause them to shoot me or something if they had a gun, there was an alarm clock, a big, heavy alarm clock over on my right, and then there was also an extra pillow on the bed. So just as I saw this form begin to come in through the window, I reached up with one hand, and I had the pillow, and I stuffed it in his face, and I was getting ready to come down on top of his head with the alarm clock. I mean, I was just right at coming down, and I heard this voice say, "Hey, Bill, it's me, Raj." And I held up before I hit him. I don't know. I'd have probably clobbered him real good with that big old clock.
Was he aware of how close he came?
He was later. Yeah, I think later on when he realized what he had done, I think it really frightened him because he realized, gee, there I was breaking in somebody's house and they didn't know it was me.
Did you ever meet anybody like him?
There was nobody. There is nobody like him.
He was one of the most creative people I ever met in my life.
The closest thing to a genius I've ever known.
Bill, I appreciate you coming by and talking to me.
I've enjoyed it, Ralph. Thank you for having me.
And I hope you'll come back sometime.
I'd love to.
Wish you well with your new album, Country Music Heaven, on Curb Records.
Thank you.